There's like 150 ACs out there. So the information is not broadly available. This information that we're giving out here is not broadly available. What's up, beer geeks? We are back with another Advanced Cicerone exam FAQ episode. We've got our certified Cicerone, soon to take the AC, Will D, with the questions that everyone's wondering about, questions that we hear all the time. And we've got Advanced Cicerone, Scott Fielder, and Chris Crow, and myself. And Chris and Scott, they just passed recently, the AC. I passed a few years ago. This episode is all about what to study. Very simple. So Will was asking, what books should be read front to back? Are there certain sections of certain books that I should focus on? I just think that there are a tight list of definite must reads, and I'm gonna name those, and Scott and Chris, you just tell me what you think, if you agree, disagree, and from there we'll go to ones that are maybe a little less important, and then we'll talk about some books that you can probably skip. All right, so must reads, to me, Cellarmanship by Patrick O'Neill. What say you guys?
Absolutely, front to back, every word,
section one Bible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's you need to memorize that book front to back. You are gonna face questions about that. It's stuff that most people don't know much about. Cask ale, beer engines, service of those kinds of beers.
A lot of people complain that one's a little dry, but it's short. So
it's very small. Yeah, it's a very short book. I have three editions of it over here. It's great. They've been Patrick O'Neill's been cranking out new editions every couple of years. So number 2 on the list.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris, if I can interrupt you. Mm-hmm. I've read I think we're on the 6th edition now.
Mm-hmm.
I read the 5th edition.
Yeah.
For my certified exam. I think I read it 2 years ago almost. I was prepped for my certified exam.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is there anything that's in there that's something that stands out to you that someone who's taking the certified exam, who's prepping for the AC, should they buy the 6th and prep for it, or is it something that's kind of nah?
That's a good question. I'm trying to remember the difference because I have read them both. I would, get the most up to date one.
Yep.
Oh yeah, and that's for any book.
Yeah.
Just if you can and you can afford it, just get the most up to date book.
Yeah, and you know what?
It's not a deal breaker if you get a cheap older copy, but the newer one that has small stuff like a graphic insert, which was pretty helpful.
That the other poster's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah. I think there were more photos and diagrams and stuff. Just a little more information. I would definitely get the latest. I mean, you're taking the AC. You paid whatever, $800 or something to take, whatever it costs. Just go for it. That's my advice. And on that topic, I'll actually skip down a couple on here and just go straight to How to Brew by John Palmer. To me, that's on the must-read list, and it's so funny to me because I hear these people talking about that book's online. That version of the book, that first edition that's online, is so completely out of date.
And some of it is reading a different book entirely.
Totally.
From the online sections. So definitely I agree completely. Get the most updated version of How to Brew.
Yep.
In the way that tasting beer is sort of the Bible of level 2, right. I think How to Brew is kind of the Bible of level 3. There's obviously a ton of information you need to know that's outside of the confines of that book, but it is in many ways the most important one in my opinion.
Covers all the bases.
For section 4 of the syllabus, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so we're agreed on that one. And then here's 2 that I know everyone will agree on, and that's the BJCP guidelines and the DBQM, which is the Draft Beer Quality Manual. BJCP guidelines, obviously, everyone already knows about that. We're going to talk about how much you need to memorize of that stuff in a different video, but obviously you need to be looking at the BJCP guidelines all the time. And then the DBQM, the Draft Beer Quality Manual, it's a very thin book published by the Brewers Association. It was actually partly put together by a master Cicerone, Neil Whitty, and it is absolutely essential. It's like the Bible for the service section.
A lot of stuff that you think might be small or irrelevant or whatever that's in the draft quality manual is not. there might be an essay question about a paragraph in that manual, basically. So
yeah, it's
on that note, let me ask you this: cleaning and timetables and stuff like that. Because I remember on my CC exam.
Yeah, you will be asked about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They had a lot of specifics about just like you tap this keg on this date. At what date do you need to start running beer cleaner through your lines?
Yep.
And
yeah.
I think just about 99% of that manual is on the table for the Advanced Cicerone exam.
Totally.
It is just you could be asked about cleaning schedules, pressure, diagrams of faucets and beer lines, and all just everything.
You need to understand every element of the draft system.
Yeah, and the syllabus specifically says that you need to know the anatomy of parts of a draft system, and then why they're used or how they're used. Like you basically have to know, like, so in a sense you could essentially get a nitro faucet potentially, and it could just have a bunch of blanks next to all the different parts, and you could have to fill out. That's on those kinds of things are on the table too.
Right.
Equations and balancing equipment.
You won't necessarily be asked to balance a draft system, but you will need to understand how that works.
Yeah, they'll ask you to give an example of something, but you're not going to have to balance an entire draft system on the exam.
So we're going to get into more of this specific stuff. Let's just go through these books. So the ingredients books, yeast, malt, and hops, 100%. Got to read them end to end and understand them very well. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. Yeast, malt, and hops for sure. There are some small intuitive chapters or sections that you can skip, but those make sense as you read them. Like one of my favorite examples is the hops book. You said front to back, Will, that you've been focusing on that. But there's a section that's kind of a little bit about all the different brewers' recipes, like for Firestone Walker, Union Jack, and Pliny the Elder and stuff. And that's good to skim and kind of have a fun idea of how brewers approach hop additions in some beers, but that's not you're not going to be asked about how Matt Brindleson uses hops in Firestone Walker beers.
Right.
So
I'm not going to need to know the exact recipe for Pliny the Elder.
Right.
But you should be able to make a fair guess based on all of the knowledge that you will have gained by doing this studying. So the ingredients book's there. The water book, we should just mention that right now. I would say that one is a little less important because it's so chemistry heavy. It's like water is one of the most complex elements in beer. Brewing water and the chemistry of brewing water is one of the most complex things you can learn about in all of beer. It's an advanced topic that you should understand the basics of, but you don't need to understand how to doctor up brewing water from plain old water to the exact amounts of ions for different places. But you should understand why different kinds of water affect beer in certain ways and why certain styles arose in certain areas of the world because the water there was better for making beers of those styles, that kind of thing, right?
Notably, that book is not on the Cicerone recommended list of books to read. So, they're sort of tacitly for advanced. So they're sort of tacitly admitting that they don't get as deep on water as they do on some of the other ingredients. And so, it's kind of a weird concept to think you need to know the basics of an advanced topic, but that's really what it is. It's you have a general idea of how different water profiles in the world affect the outcome of beer, and you're going to be great.
Yeah.
The best place to learn about what you need to know for water is in How to Brew.
Right.
John Palmer talks about it just enough. A lot about chloride, sulfate, some of the basic stuff. If you have a really good working knowledge of what he writes about, you will be just fine.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Actually, I didn't realize that book wasn't even on the list, but John Palmer does get into it in How to Brew, and that is even I would say probably where he takes it in that book, even maybe goes slightly beyond, because he is trying to tell homebrewers how to doctor up their water. But yeah, it's a pretty good section in his book about that. So that'll pretty much cover you on water.
It's easier to grasp than the water book is.
Oh my God,
the water book is quite high level.
It's a
I
nightmare.
tried reading. Yeah, I tried reading the first chapter of the water book. I'm like, man, I need a master's in chemistry degree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, this is outrageous. Like, I can't understand any part of it.
Right. Well, and the chemistry of hops and yeast activity is plenty complicated, and then you get to the water stuff, and you're like, oh my god, it gets so much worse. So, anyway, I didn't realize that book wasn't even on the list. So maybe that makes it to the skippable section then. How about the Beer Bible by Jeff Allworth? I think that one's really great for learning more about classic styles and their history, and also like learning, one thing you want to know for the test is you want to be able to name all these classic examples. You're going to get asked on the test, like, to name classic examples and, name 2 from that country, name 1 from the U.S., stuff like that. And to me, the Beer Bible was helpful for just kind of understanding the beer cultures and the breweries that make these beers, the places that I haven't been able to visit, that kind of thing. I don't know. What do you guys think? This one I was less sure of as a must read.
Yeah, I wouldn't quite elevate it to must read, but I would say that it is a really great reference. And if you kind of understand, like, hey, I need a little bit more information about some commercial examples of beer for people like Will that are in the Southeast rather than the Northwest, which Jeff's book is like a little bit heavier on some examples from the Northwest.
It's true.
Then that gives you a lot of extra beer examples to talk about and stuff. But I would treat it like it's an amazing book. It's one of my favorites, but I would treat it as a reference to kind of supplement a lot of the other studies too. So I think it's a necessary reference for me.
Got it. So it's a less important but great read that will help kind of book.
That's my take.
If you do read it, don't get sucked into the history. Like, the history is great, and the book is great, but you don't need, like, that's something you should not be
It's true.
Focusing on.
What? You're right, Scott. That's true. I love that stuff, and I know we all do, but you're kind of right. You don't really get asked about that stuff.
We were shocked at how little. There's basically no history.
There's basically no.
Like,
history.
you
Really?
definitely could be asked about seminal moments in history, but you really just sort of like need to know, when Pilsner malt
Daniel
became a
Wheeler
thing,
and
for
stuff
example.
like that.
It's nice to know that stuff. If you get to throw it into an essay as a one-line addition, just to show you have some extra knowledge, that kind of stuff is great.
If you get all your other studying done, you can study some history as a treat. But that's it.
Yeah.
Yep. The only thing history related that you should study is historical beers in the BJCP.
Yeah, there you go.
Like Lichtenstein. Those are what.
Yeah, indeed, you should study that one. Okay, so Brewmaster Stable by Garrett Oliver. I like that one as a general review of like classic style flavor profiles and food pairings that generally work well. To be honest, I would say you actually need to take your descriptive abilities and your food pairing kind of descriptive abilities to an even higher level than that book for the AC, but it's still a nice read, I think, for like review. What do you guys think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good book for review, and I think it's a good book to see how to sort of talk about beer and food romantically. Mm-hmm. But if you're really looking to be able to talk about your, like anything outside of that book, because trust me, the Cicerone program has heard it all from Garrett Oliver's book. They've heard people repeat those over and over. And if you can speak from some sort of personal experience that you have, you'll set yourself apart from
100%.
Everybody else. And
100%.
They notice that stuff. They pay attention to that stuff. So I would recommend that seeing that, taking it in, but then for me, it's the new appendix that they released when it's related to Section 5, knowing all of that stuff. And then there's another particular section in the syllabus where they talk about common beer and food interactions. Mm-hmm. So when a beer has phenolics, how does that interact with food? When it has high alcohol, how does it? If you can just put those, it's like 7 or 8 maybe different sections into flashcards. If you can memorize that, you can walk yourself through just about any pairing that they give you. If you were to get something about pairing, you will be extremely prepared, even if it's 2 things you just know about, but you've never, maybe tasted together. Right. You'll be able to walk through it. That to me is super important.
Just real briefly, the following I'll repeat quite a bit is, have a little bit of wherewithal about where you are on some of these topics that are in these books, because if you're like a very scientifically minded person and you're approaching food pairing and you think you have the foundationals kind of down, then the Garrett Oliver book, I think, becomes a lot more important for you because it does teach you how to sprinkle in some more poetic, more delicious sounding, romantic language. And the more you ratchet up the specificity on your flavor notes and incorporate that into all the kind of like scientific foundational stuff you're doing, that's huge. And if you're the inverse, that book is not going to be as important to you. If you're a foodie that eats a ton of different cuisines all the time, chef in a former life, you can describe flavor, that's not going to be as important. But I love that book, so
that's a good point.
At a minimum, It's got to be a reference.
Yeah, that's a great book. I think
it's a balance of the two for sure. It's a balance of the two for sure. Because you can be super romantic about it, but then if you're not mentioning the 3 C's or you're not talking about canceling, and you also want to be clear too. And Chris and I were kind of on each end of the closer to different ends of the spectrum. So that was a big help for the two of us. We kind of got help kind of meeting each other in the middle and being like, okay, we're being clear, we're mentioning all the 3 C's, the things that are in the syllabus, but also we have to make so that for me it was, how can you make it sound a little bit more appetizing or delicious to a customer.
Well, that's cool. All right, like that. Okay, before we leave the must read section, what did I leave out, you guys?
I'm going to say the thing that I think is just for in terms of resources that is pretty obvious, but we found ourselves having to remind our group to go back to it again and again, is you need to read through the syllabus. You need to look through the syllabus, read it, because there's little footnotes that say, oh, you need to know this and this thing, like about the draft system thing, where you have to know the anatomy and how each thing works. I mean, that's just in little print at the bottom. It's not in, you have to comb through we were doing practice questions for weeks and weeks, and I would be looking through the syllabus and I would still be able to find things that I couldn't believe we still hadn't asked multiple choice, made a multiple choice question out of it yet.
Interesting.
So just make sure you are, and there wwere questions where I looked back our first couple of weeks and I was asking questions that were not in the syllabus. I was asking about malt disease, and hop disease is the only, kind of in that realm that's in the syllabus. They don't ask you to learn, that's not part of the syllabus. So you just have to keep referring back to the syllabus as much as you can and know it as well as you can, because it's going to save you some time, most likely.
Good call. The syllabus. Everyone takes it for granted. Yeah. You look it over, you think you get it, and then you kind of just start studying. But to refer back to the syllabus repeatedly, that's really good advice. Anything else? Yeah, what do you want to add, Chris?
Back into the discussion.
Which one? Tasting beer, yeah.
Tasting beer. Which we talked about how that's we've spoken about before, how that's kind of the Bible of level 2, certified level. But I know I would have benefited from an extra read of tasting beer somewhere near my advanced exam, because it's helpful not to think of that as like a basic book, because it's so informative. An extra read is going to get you some of the, there's a difference between foundational knowledge and basic knowledge, and you're re-upping foundational knowledge when you reread tasting beer. It's not that basic. There's a lot of complicated stuff in there. And so it's a helpful refresher on brewing process, flavor. You'll be able to incorporate everything you've learned back in. And so I think that's you've already read it if you're going up for AC. So it's a helpful reread. Yeah,
I reread it when the new edition came out a few years ago, and I was kind of amazed at how complete it is, how much it covers, and it was a great review. I enjoyed it.
And there's a sprinkling of what you might feel like are level 2 style questions on the advanced exam.
Right.
It's not to say that they're simple, but it's just like, oh, there's a handful of questions that feel like they're a little bit more foundational level 2 type stuff. And that's totally fine. But if you kind of skyrocket to all the more complicated and intricate advanced Cicerone stuff, and you don't remember different base malt varieties or something, it's like, that's going to hurt you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what can I talk about just one resource pitfall that that when Chris and I were studying, we just really think is not a good idea to really dive into. And it's really weird to say, and it's the reason why we're doing this FAQ series, is because a lot of people think that podcasts about beer are like a really good study resource. And it's not maybe that there's no good information. It's just that if you're putting in, let's just say that an average of 60 minutes of listening to a podcast, and you maybe get one or two things out of it, you're probably not spending your time really wisely. And this is why we're doing this, because we think it's so important. So listen to this one, this series.
Don't listen to the other.
Because we're focusing, because we're focusing on it. But there's and there's some that are getting that are a lot better nowadays. Like I think False Bottom Girls with Jen Blair and Rachel Hudson, they're really education focused. But there's a lot where it's there's shooting the shit for the first 15 minutes, and then it's what beer are we drinking for the next 15 minutes, and then maybe something gets snuck in there, or some of them they've been good, but it's like way too far. Like when you listen to the Yakima Valley, podcast series, like some of the depth they go in there is way beyond what you need. So even then, even the places where you find where it's maybe relevant, it's almost too far. So it's tempting. But spend your time wisely.
Yeah, I find my job as host of the Beer Scholar Family Hour is to herd everybody and keep them on track. We're trying to answer some questions here.
Right.
That's half the job. That's half the host job.
Yeah.
I mean, and to build upon Scott, what you said, for all those CCs that are watching this right now and looking for places to study and to learn and whatnot, I think I'm a little biased because, Chris, I used your study guide to pass my CC exam, and I would not say that I would say that I would have a much harder time passing the CC exam without the Beer Scholar, but so much of the other stuff out there is so focused on Scott, exactly what you said, like, oh, I'm drinking this beer, you want to taste it this way, and I'm thinking this about this beer, right? And that's good knowledge, right? Like these people, the other ACs.
It's entertainment.
In some, there's nothing wrong with what they're doing, right?
Yeah, of course.
But if you're studying,
absolutely,
a lot of the stuff that they're talking about is not necessarily what a CC who's looking to become an Advanced Cicerone wants. You know what I mean?
There's not a lot of great educational resources out there. That's the truth of the matter, and it's literally the reason I started Beer Scholar. I mean, going way back to 2014 when I was studying for the exam, the CC myself, I was super frustrated by the lack of information. Obviously, it wasn't before podcasts. There were podcasts, and they were called podcasts. It wasn't like there weren't. But it was hard to even meet other certified Cicerones who could tell me about the exam. So that's why we're doing this FAQ for the AC, because we're kind of in an era now where it's sort of similar. There's like 150 ACs out there, so the information is not broadly available. This information that we're giving out here is not broadly available. Scott, Chris, and I are working on an AC course. It will not be out in the very near future, but hopefully it's out when, whoever's listening to this in, I don't know what, a year or something. We're going to do it section by section. So it's coming.
After I take the exam.
Slowly but surely. As soon as we're going to release the whole course as soon as Will finishes his exam. Sorry, dude. All right. So I've got another little list. I want to go through these quicker. Less important reads, but great reads that will kind of help, right? Radical Brewing by Randy Mosher. I don't know. What do you guys think? I love that book. I just found it to be so fun. It made me want to brew. It made me interested in historical styles. I don't know if it's not strictly necessary, but it's fun and it's informative. What do you guys think?
I do like it because he does brew a lot of styles that aren't as popular nowadays. And so it's like, it gives you a little window into that. But there are all these funny moments in the book, too, where he's like, it's both useful because he says, like, this is the traditional way to brew this beer. And then his recipe's like, but I don't do that. Here's like the way that I'll do it. And so you just have to use that as a kind of a recipe reference, I think, with an open mind.
Well, I'm probably biased because I, in a way, got my start in beer as a home brewer. So I'm a huge Randy Mosher fan. I'm a fanboy, Randy Mosher fanboy. Stan.
Nice.
I'm sorry. Can I interrupt real quick?
I would say he has a section in there on cooking with beer.
Oh, that's true.
In Radical Brewing, and that it's really small. It's maybe like a couple of pages where he talks about it. but it's really good. And I would highly recommend people refer to that. I refer to that a lot.
So that was influential for Scott. What were you saying, Will?
Chris, I've read all your stuff online, Chris Cohen. So I'm familiar with your story, but Scott and Chris Crow, like, how much have y'all brewed? Because we're talking about Randy Mosher and the stuff that he's written, and to y'all's point, like, he writes towards homebrewers.
Yeah.
And I've been brewing beer since 2010. That's how I got into this program. So I'm kind of curious as to, if I may, what is y'all's background as far as brewing? It's an interesting part of this journey that we're all going on.
Yeah.
Well, I think I can synthesize it real quick because I know we have a lot of information to go through, but it's what I like about the amalgamation of the beer scholars that we have is that Chris Cohen has extensive and deep homebrewing experience. I have sort of started brewing all grain a little bit about 8 years ago, but don't homebrew super frequently and have never, run a homebrew club or anything like that. And then, Scott has brewed some batches in his studies and stuff, but I don't think he would describe himself as like an extensive home brewer. So it's like, I think we represent the entire continuum of homebrewing experience.
Well, and I think the broader point here to be made is that people come into this with different areas of areas of knowledge that they're really good at. Like when I came into this, I was really bad with the sort of service-related stuff. I didn't know anything about draft systems and service because I hadn't really worked in that part of the industry. So now I have. Now I own a bar. But, at the time when I took my CC and I had to do my demo portion, like I had never touched that device that they asked me to take apart and clean and like fake clean on video. I had never touched that device in my life, in real life. And I literally was like, well, these things unscrew. And I pulled it apart and did a good enough job. But everyone comes in with different strengths. And, it's a good point. Know your strengths and shore yourself up in those other areas. But also don't fool yourself by thinking that, I've homebrewed, forever. So I really understand brewing process. Like, read everything, make sure you really get it, know the chemistry, and then really, really focus on those areas that you're weak in. So that's my advice on that. I'm gonna zip.
The other thing. I was gonna say the other thing I would mention too is if you are a home brewer, then my question is, do you know how to explain how to do that in great detail to someone else and why things happen the way that they do?
Such a good point.
Can you explain? So, there's part of it where experience is going to play a big part in it, but you also have to understand how to communicate all of that in a detailed way.
Yep.
And there are these books that we're recommending help you do that.
Right. There's like every homebrewer out there could say like, oh, I know that I should boil for 60 minutes or whatever, but do you know why and what's happening when you do that? Like what the point is, what the chemistry is? Can we move on to some more books? We're definitely not going to get through this list by nightfall if we don't get moving. All right, let's do it. So let's give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. These are books that we think are helpful but not required. Brew Like a Monk by Stan Hieronymus. Yeah, helpful. American Sour Beers by Michael Tonsmere. I think that's actually on the list. On the AC. No? Oh, Scott says no.
Man, that's...
You're iffy or you're disagreeing?
I'm going to give it a thumbs up, but it's complicated. It's complicated because it's such a contemporary take on sour beer that there's a ton of useful information in there, but it's just like how much of the exam is going to be about that.
That's fair. I'm going to say Mastering Homebrew by Randy Mosher. It just gets a little deeper, goes into more recipe stuff. I don't know if you guys have read that one.
Didn't read that.
I didn't read it either. Yeah, sorry.
So probably that's not required. Tasty by John McQuaid or Quaid. Did you guys read that one for AC?
Never read it.
Okay, it's all about the science of how you taste. It's cool.
See that's an.
Go ahead, Will.
I'm 90% sure that's not on the recommended list, but
yeah, no, I think it's on the recommended list for Master.
Master.
I think it's on the recommended list for AC.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I've
Crazy.
I read half of it, and now that you all said this,
Yeah.
maybe I won't read the second half.
I mean, look, it's fun. Like, I don't think you need to read it.
It's a cool book.
Yeah, it's super cool.
It's a really, really cool book.
Yeah.
But, if you're trying to push through the AC exam like I am, then maybe...
Yeah, if you're in a rush, it's probably not required. I mean, and maybe this next one is like that too. Brewing Classic Styles by Jamil Zainasheff and John Palmer. It's basically a recipe book. And if you're a home brewer, it will mean something to you. And I think if you're not a home brewer, it may be, I don't know, maybe that makes it even more important that you read it. But I don't know. Did you guys use that one?
No.
I did read that one. I'll put read in scare quotes because I think it's all those books that have a ton of recipes in them, you're probably going to mention a few extras.
Yeah.
I think those are good reference books, and just keep in mind, like, I need to learn a little bit more about alt beer. Right. I'm going to look through a couple recipes, and that's not the same as rereading a whole book. That's just confirming some suspicions you have about classic styles.
Good point. What do you guys think of The Beer Lover's Table by Claire Bullen?
Didn't read that one.
Didn't read that one. I really love that one for food and beer pairing. I think it's one of the better ones that come out recently. How about Wood and Beer by Dick Cantwell?
Wood and Beer is great, but it's one of those ones that is almost also so deep on a topic that I wonder what the return is, because if you really know what the Oxford Companion to Beer says about barrel aging, for example, I think that's like the vast majority of what you need to know.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah. There's maybe one chapter in that book that's pretty useful for the exam.
There can be some questions about wood aging. How about Wild Brews by Jeff Sparrow?
I'd give it a thumbs down for I
agree.
For necessity. I did like it as a reference, but
okay. How about Building a Sensory Program by Master Cicerone Pat Fahey?
Great off flavors section. If you would just use that for the off flavors that are in there, he does a very, very good job. I felt like having that book come out right before our exam and getting to read that. I don't know. I poured over it and I got a 99 on my off flavor essay. So
there you go. So we got a thumbs up for one of my suggestions.
Chris, you mentioned
that one's not even on the list yet because it's so new.
Right, and it's expensive.
And it's pricey, and you can ignore. They're not going to ask you to build a sensory program on the exam,
right.
But anytime a Master Cicerone is talking about flavor compounds, you should keep an open eye and an open ear.
Yeah.
The broad takeaway is all of Cicerone's like YouTube programming and other stuff is useful because it's literally geared toward people that are taking the exam. So there's the fluff that's in there is just maybe a random story here or there. Right. But even like, the Czech beer discussions with Evan Rail, Neil Whitty tags in on a few of the Tasting Together episodes. Even if they're talking about something you might think is boring, like clean glassware, I would tune into everything that Cicerone program produces.
100%. Yeah, they're the other organization that is doing loads of educational content. All right. We wouldn't exist but for them, but also... they're doing it. All right, cool. So definitely pay attention to what the Cicerone program's telling you, because they are, that's like straight out of the mouth of God, basically. The information that you most need. All right. I'm just gonna zip through a few more here. All right.
Yeah.
Brewing with Wheat, Stan Hieronymus. A little too specific, you guys think?
Kind of falls under the wild beer section, that whole kind of series of books,
Farmhouse Ales by Phil Markowski would be in that category. What about the new Brewing Lager Beer by Greg Noonan?
I didn't get any epiphanies from that book. I like it, but it's, enough of lagering and, conditioning and stuff is captured in a lot of the other books too. Got
it. What about The Chef's Companion by Elizabeth Riley? Like, for people who are not cooks and look at that section, the appendix in the back of the AC syllabus, and they're like, I don't know what sautéing is. Did you guys use anything in particular to help you learn cooking techniques and ingredients and the food stuff?
Honestly, that is like the section of the syllabus that bucks my advice about not using outside information, because if you're learning someone else's brewing process in a random podcast or whatever, that's not necessarily the way Cicerone's going to test you on it.
Yeah.
But I think watching everything from cooking shows to recipe videos to reading other cookbooks is incredibly helpful, particularly if that is your weakness. We all have a weak section of the exam, and that's the section that this, besides the addition of the appendix to the food section of the syllabus, there's not that much information to glean from that section of the syllabus. It's sort of just like know a bunch of stuff about food and how it pairs with beer. So a lot of stuff helps, I think.
In a way, it should be easy points, right? They're telling you these are the things you need to know. And if you walk into the test and you don't know those things, you're just totally blowing it. Like, they're free points. They're telling you, right? They're telling you they're going to ask you what falafel's made from. And if you walk in and you don't know that it's fried chickpeas, mashed up chickpeas that are fried, like you're blowing it.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. So, okay. What I'm just going to ask you guys: is there anything you can think of that are like less important but very helpful? Anything you want to add?
There are. The Aroxa program started uploading some of their like really short 4 or 5 minute videos about flavor compounds. I think that's super important because that's what Cicerone uses.
Right. That's a good call.
So anything from Yakima Valley hop related is going to obviously get I think to me, if you're looking to outside resources, you just have to be really smart. You just have to know that there's a difference between getting hop information from, Yakima Chief and, the old beer advocate message boards.
Oh my God. Yeah.
One of those is,
garbage.
Well, let me ask you all this real quick, because there are some sections, and maybe we'll discuss this in another chapter of this series, but there are some sections where I cannot find specific information about what the syllabus says. Like, the syllabus specifically mentions agroeconomics for hop production.
Yeah.
And in the hops book, I can't find anything about it, like specifically talking about agroeconomics. In all the other books, like, nobody's talking about, the economics of having a farm, right? And so,
we are gonna mention that. We are gonna talk about that, and really, I think what it comes down to, I think, Scott, you put it best in the notes that you shared. Something to do with, like, is this core to beer and beer making?
Right. And again, the way I approach that, because I have the same, question for, things like that, is you can get information from other places. Cicerone's not just kind of saying these are the only places you can get information about beer. You just have to be really smart.
Yeah.
And I remembered thinking, wow, Yakima Chief, when it comes to hop harvesting, they have really great videos that just talk about here's how it starts and here's where everything goes step by step. And it's super simple, and it's like 12, 14 minutes or something that. And it was super helpful.
I just included one of those in my latest Beer Scholar weekly 6-pack newsletter. And you should all sign up for that.
Do not miss those.
Yeah, it's like, it's like some 10-minute video that shows hop farming from planting to baling. I mean, it's amazing. It's like scenery I'd never actually seen before, right? I mean, the actual work on the farm. It's
right.
We know it's happening, but we have no idea what it looks like. So that stuff is super cool.
And we'll get into kind of how specific do we go in another.
So, okay, books you can probably skip. I'm just going to go down this list. You tell me if you just totally disagree. I think I pulled all of these off the AC list. And this I apologize to Ray Daniels for, but Designing Great Beers?
Skip.
Homebrewer's Guide to Vintage Beer by Ron Pattinson. Super cool guy. Met him, love him. He's awesome. Don't think you need it for the AC.
Oh, that's a hard skip. I was like, you're really...
right?
Felt like you were setting us up. You're just like, but he's a great guy. Come on.
Well, he is. I mean, I've brewed beers out of that book, and I've done professional collab beers using some of his recipes. So he's not, it's not like he's not amazing. I just don't think you need to read that. Yeah. It's mostly recipes anyway.
It's also mostly historical recipes.
It's totally historical. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not.
That's another
You
kind
don't
of,
need to
yeah,
know that much history.
level.
So.
AKA vintage. Okay, IPA by Mitch Steele.
I think you can pass the exam if you skip it, as long
Yeah.
as you're really good on the hops book.
The Road to Cicerone courses. I've heard that keeping and serving is pretty great. The rest of them, I think, are skippable.
Keeping and serving is pretty great. The only other thing that we really used them a lot for was commercial examples that they use in the different, the Belgian beer book, the German one, because they give some different examples that are not in the BJCP, and obviously if they have them in their own material, then I would think that they're fair game for exam purposes.
All right, I should take a look at those. They're kind of marketed as being for the CC. I think that the AC you need to go beyond that stuff, but I know the keeping and serving one I've heard is very helpful, maybe even at the AC level. But
yeah, I think you can use them, but then you've got to figure out how can I kind of make whatever they're trying to have me learn. How can I kind of take that to the next level?
Yeah.
Yeah. How can I go further than what they're saying in these books? Yeah.
Right.
It's a matter of value to you. If you have the extra coin to grab a couple of those and you want a little bit more of a distilled bit of information about one of those topics, I don't see the harm in it, but it is stuff that you can learn on the recommended resources without buying, the German styles Road to Cicerone.
Right. And it's like very expensive.
Yeah, and I think that kind of just brings us back to this whole thing where even if we maybe gave a thumbs down to a book or we thought it maybe wasn't, as important, we definitely, Crow, tell me if I'm, if I'm off base here, but we definitely found it, because you can only read the malt and the hop book so many times before the words just don't mean anything anymore.
Right.
And so you're gonna have some of those books that are gonna be kind of useful, but they're gonna be like a treat for you to read. Like that's what Brew Like a Monk was for me. Like whenever I felt like studying wasn't fun, I would just read a couple chapters in that book, and then I would would be great. I think the books that we're recommending and the resources really are kind of like the core, but then when you can take that core and read the other books, and then you can think, I can understand why they're saying this and why this is happening, but they're not explaining it to me why that is the way that it is. Right. But it makes sense to me, and and Chris always had this great imagery for it. It was almost like you were filling out the rest of the spider web of information. You kind of had patches here and there, but then all of a sudden you were able to kind of look back at the bigger picture, and all of a sudden everything just started connecting. Everything just started making sense together. And so there is there is some good to reading those resources, but those should not be seen as things that you're consistently going back to over and over for memorization.
Right. So the things that are on my helpful but not required list are the kind of things where I think you should pick several of them and just read them because they are things that interest you, and they will help you synthesize information that is contained in all these other books, right? It will link all these things together. It'll help you understand them. It'll reinforce things. They may not be absolutely critical, but I say this to people even who are studying for the CC. I'm like, yeah, tasting beer is your Bible, and there's a couple other resources that are helpful. But if you're truly interested in beer, which presumably you are, otherwise you wouldn't be doing this, then, hey, if it's Trappist beers that you love, then go read Brew Like a Monk. If it's sours that you love, go read Wild Brews. If it's, English stuff, then find some books on that. Whatever. It'll all make so much more sense, and it'll kind of bring things together.
And we're approaching these recommendations with a timeline in mind, right? If you have all the time in the world,
yeah, read them all.
Read whatever you want. All of these books are useful. We're trying to answer questions in a way that's like, shit, the exam's coming up in 3 or 4 months.
Right.
Can I still pass if I skip some of these things? And that's not a value judgment on anything on the list, because they're all, I've read 90% of them, and they're all awesome because we're super nerds.
I didn't put a single book on this list that wasn't one I liked. I was going to say the Oxford Companion was one that you didn't need, but you know what? I actually
cover to cover, yeah.
Well, definitely not cover to cover. You know what? For me, this is maybe will seem insulting, but it's like a bathroom book for me. You can flip it open to any page and read for a few minutes and learn something new.
Hold on now,
For
because
reference,
my
though,
entire
for
study
reference, though,
period-
the
my entire
Oxford
study strategy
Companion
up
is
until now
super
has just
important.
been out of the Oxford Companion books.
Yeah. Yes, just read the Oxford Companion cover to cover. You'll be good.
Don't do that. It's too much. You'll be taking in too much history.
Yeah. I
So,
think...
no, but there are sections in there that are definitely worth knowing, and you should use it as a reference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Michael Jackson's great beer guide is good and fun, but not required. Bitter, A Taste of the World's Most Dangerous Flavor by Jen McLaughlin. I actually have read a bunch of her books. I think she is amazing. And I think that Bitter, it's on the list for, I think, AC, definitely MC, maybe not. I might be wrong.
Pretty sure it's pretty sure it's just Master.
Okay. Well, it's an awesome book, but you definitely don't need it. And then the final one I have on here is the BA's Style Guidelines. Good for a laugh if you want to look at those.
They ask you to be kind of prepared about the differences for the master exam, but not the advanced exam.
Right. Yeah. It's just wildly different. It's worth a peek, but it's definitely you're going to spend 5 minutes being like, wow, this is crazy, and then go back to the BJCP. Okay, so we're going to finish up this whole video real quick here. The next question was outside list of recommended resources. We've already covered a lot of those, certain like Yakima Chief, the Cicerone program, that kind of stuff. But here's what I wanted to add to that. It's something I cannot stress enough, and that's personal experience. And Scott mentioned it earlier with pairing. It's like, yeah, sure. If you go in there and you say, pair, American Hefeweizen with a salad, they're going to be like, yeah, that's like on page 1 of, whatever book, and it's boring, and we've heard it a million times, and it actually doesn't even work that well. You know what I mean? So, personal experience with brewing, with cooking with beer, with doing pairings, with tasting classics, with taking tasting notes on those classics, cleaning a draft system yourself, pouring draft beer yourself, go to a bar where you know somebody, I don't know, before they open or something, and just do it. I mean, you just have to do these things. Outside resources, Crow, Fielder, you got any extra advice on that?
I think we covered my main ones. I think anything Rosa puts out that is about a flavor compound that is in the syllabus, don't waste time on compounds that are not in the syllabus, is really important. All the Cicerone programming is super important.
Yep.
And those are just fun to put on in the background too, because they're pretty casual. You learn a lot, but they're super casual. So it's not like you have to have the world's most active listening mind to hear about what triples taste like.
False Bottom Girls, we mentioned that. They're great.
Yep.
False Bottom Girls is geared toward dedication, so that's good.
Mm-hmm. What do you got to add, Scott?
Now that you have the appendix for all of the ingredients that you need to know and all of the dishes, this Flavor Bible book.
Oh, great book.
It's so good. It has all of those in them, and it says how intense it is in a dish, how it should be used, when cooking a dish, whether you should always heat it, whether it should never be heated and should always be served raw, what it goes well with, and it's just all chefs that are referencing this, and I'm using it for putting together Master Cicerone flashcards for the appendix that they, that they updated for that one, and I think you could even use it for, stuff for AC, because, if you can just know that certain things together or are just really good pairings, and it's a really good resource.
Yeah. Cool. That's a good call. All right. Final bit for this section. Will asks, were there any instances of syllabus topics that you could not find information on? You referred to this before, talking about hop agronomics and stuff like that. And so I'm just going to wrap it up by kind of saying what I think on that, which is, the stuff you're talking about there when you're asking about, migrant workers and labor required for training and harvesting hops, and do they want you to know about soil usage and farming economics and stuff like that? I mean, that stuff is so far beyond the scope of what you need to know for the exam. I know that it says hop agronomics or whatever on the syllabus, but you need to focus on the core, on stuff that is core to beer, and making beer and tasting beer. And once you get to one or so levels away from that, you're going too far. Back when I took the exam, I had trouble finding great information on food and beer pairing interactions, and now there's tons of great new resources for that. But generally, I would say no. There's really not anything that I had a lot of trouble finding information on. If you stick to those core books that we talked about, and then supplement that with a bunch of additional reading of things that you're interested in personally to just round it out, you're gonna be fine. Is that we got general agreement on that?
Yeah.
Yep, and I would say if you're a visual learner or a hands-on type learner, then make sure you read all the core books and start to develop an understanding of those. And then all the visual stuff is bonus, right? Watching some, Leader's Beverage has a good YouTube channel about keeping and serving. Asking a brewery to tag in on cleaning lines. That's just going to cement the things that you read into your visual memory.
Yep. Learn by doing. So cool. I think we kind of crushed that whole section. I think we're at the point where we're just gonna. I thought these were gonna be kind of like, I don't know why I always think this. I always think we're gonna like bang through some shit and it's gonna be like popping quick. Now I'm just like, this is just a whole episode of the Beer Scholar Family Hour podcast is what's going on here.
Sometimes it just happens.
That'd be like an hour or something. Anyway, that was a lot of really good information. Did you hear what you needed to hear there, Will?
This whole conversation has been absolutely wonderful because now I know what I need to read. I know what I need to look at. I know what I need to go after. And, because like when we first, Chris, when I first reached out to you, like I was reading the Water book from John Palmer, and I love John Palmer. Like I've been brewing for 10 years.
It's a brutal book.
And Palmer's work is so good.
Yeah.
Like he is so educational. But when I read his book, I'm like, Jesus Christ, like, do I need a master's degree in chemistry to pass this exam?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
That's when you know you've gone
exactly.
too far.
When you're becoming an expert at like a grad degree level,
totally different field.
In something that's like not like absolutely core to beer making, you're probably taking it a step too far, And we're going to get more into that when we talk about the level of knowledge required for different areas of knowledge, which is coming up in a future episode. So I think we got that nailed down, and we'll move on to the next question for the next episode. What do you guys think?
That was great. I love the review. It keeps us sharp too.
That's true, because we're all like starting to think about the MC. So all right, we will see you again in the next episode very shortly. Cheers, y'all.
Cheers, everybody.